But as you well,
Sorry, I forgot to push record.
got it. So, got it. So as you well know, only about 20 to 25% of all PhDs become TT, tenure track faculty members, and even adding in community colleges and other sorts of things, there's still a minority of the PhDs will do that. So, and many of them, after their PIs in their labs, do a lot of moaning and crying about, oh my gosh, it's so hard. I'm always writing grants and whatever proposals. I never get to do science anymore. Then when the student or the postdoc says, I don't want to be a faculty person, then the faculty, that faculty person, their PI gets angry with me saying, you are the one who's made them go off to the dark side, the business side. So that's not the case. But I also know that people, when I was on the business side, I was a hiring manager. So in other words, someone for whom you might work, because I was usually an officer in the companies for which I worked. And so I had a lot of people working for me. So I was a hiring manager over many. And I also found that PhDs really didn't know how to apply for those jobs either. So I was able, because I made a lot of money on the dark side, which many of you, if you're looking to do a resume, are probably looking to do. I made a lot of money, so I was able to take a 80% cut in salary and come back to academe and do what I do now. So I enjoy it very much, and I'm pleased that you're interested. I want to talk first the difference there. So, as you probably know or may or may not know, the undergrads at Washington U, it's interesting. My colleagues that I alluded to earlier who work in the Career Center would always send me an undergrad who was applying to something in Europe and therefore needed a CV. But my colleagues had already done a good job with their resumes. So they said, no, you have to talk to Arlene. She's the only one who knows how to do curriculum vitae. And so they'd come to me and I'd look at it and it was done very well. So I'd say, okay, let's write curriculum vitae at the top. And the student would say, that's it? I said, yeah, now you have a CV. Because really the content shouldn't be substantially different unless the place that you are looking to go requests it. So the content is dependent upon where you're targeting. And if that content is also, if they want you also to have a diversity statement or other sorts of things in your CV or resume, that's going to dictate how you might do the resume differently. Otherwise, the bulk of the resumes are going to be very similar, and CVs will be very similar to what I'm showing you now. Now, if you read in depth what I've written, it was written tongue in cheek. So, when I would hand it out, I'd wait for, it was mostly the STEM people who would come to me and say, could this really be true? Could you have been in the lab of Watson and Crick? I mean, like, they've probably been dead for a while. And so you must really be old. I said, well, yeah, I am very old, but still. And so they would see these things like some of the authors of my papers were Tweedledee and Tweedledum, that sort of thing. They would note that. But the humanists, the humanities PhDs, because I work with all of them, who would come and see this just said, oh, yeah, that's important. They had no idea who Watson and Crick were. So you'll see some of that. But what's most important is that you look at what these sections are and what the content is, not necessarily the total meaning of the content, but what it's about. So both the CV and the resume, and generally, as I mentioned about the undergrad, if we're going to Europe, if you're applying to Novartis or Merck Europe, any of the places, any place that you might be looking for a position in Europe, they'll ask for a CV. So, oh my gosh, I didn't do my CV since I was working on my graduate degree. It's no different than your resume. It's just that's what they call it in other countries. Here, if you say you need a CV, I automatically know that you're most probably going into looking at academic kinds of positions. If you say resume, then I know, oh, okay, so she wants to or he wants to become something in industry. So in fact, the difference is very slight. Both should accomplish the same purpose, and that purpose is they're advertising pieces. It's not a tell-all, and that's the problem with many CVs. They tell too much. When I was doing my postdoc at Harvard, I was already a dean at the school that I was doing a turnaround in, but the PI there wanted to steal the theoretical orientation of my dissertation. And rather than just steal it, I probably would never have noticed. he decided he should offer me a postdoc that, so he could legitimately take my research. And while I was there, because I could only commute there, we couldn't do virtual. This was 1983. And so we didn't have the ability to do virtual other than by phone. When I would commute back and forth, and because I had 3 children and a husband, and I was already a dean in St. Louis, uh, I would commute there, and I would have spare time sometimes between getting there and flights home and so on. So I would go around to the faculty, and since I was a provost by that point, I could ask them and they would answer honestly. I said, I bet when you're on a search committee, you don't read all of the CVs that you get. And they said, oh, of course we do. Yes, of course we do. And I said, yeah, really, I'm sure. How many did you get for the last position you were advertising? They said, oh, 300. Because Harvard, everybody, no matter whether they have a bachelor's degree and are going for a senior professor position, whatever, they believe Harvard is the place first to apply. And so I said, so you actually read all of them? Well, I actually scan them. So my assumption, my hypothesis was that people don't read all of anybody's CV or resume. And so if you look at this particular piece that I have in front of you that I've shared with you, this is what you should have in your CV or resume, a professional profile, okay? Because research since that time, so this was a long time ago, has shown that nobody reads past 30 seconds on somebody's resume. So some people will have their top piece where you see the Arlene Taich, which actually was my maiden name. You see all that stuff at the top. Some people will make that even more expansive. Now, like yesterday, I had someone actually who gave his birth date, his citizenship, and so on. That's not unless asked for, and they won't ask for birth date anyway. But gave all that kind of stuff and took up more than a third of the first page. Well, if I read that, that's going to take care of my 30 seconds. So all I know is some demographics about that person, where he lives, what his phone number is, whether he's got ResearchGate or any other sorts of LinkedIn kinds of profiles, etc. So you want to go after giving the required data, which may be only in the CV or resume, just your name and perhaps your address, but not necessarily, but certainly a home phone or a phone where you can be reached, because the office phone is not the best, and an email and perhaps a LinkedIn connection. Those are all that they need. Most people are not going to be writing to you unless they're emailing you. But text number, that's another story. They may text you things. So you don't need to spend a lot of energy or a lot of paper space doing that top piece, because that's just a waste. What you really need to focus on is the professional profile. And if you look at that professional profile, what it is essentially an abstract of the rest of your CV or resume. Now, the big difference between the CV and resume isn't yet here at the professional profile. I would suggest that you do it for either case. And in fact, when I first came to Washington U, the students in the DBBS, which is the largest graduate department of Washington U, were telling me, no, you're telling us to do this all wrong. We don't do that. That's, you're still in business. I said, no. I mean, they forgot that I'd had 17 years of being an academician before that. And again, they told me when I said, how do you, why is this what you say? Because my roommate said, we don't do this. That's not true. What you want to do is a professional profile in either the CV or resume. Which you'll see absent here, because this is more of a resume than a CV, is you will not see names of PIs or faculty, or whose lab you were in if you were in a lab, or who your boss was if you are in a company already, or if you're in practice of some sort, physical therapy, whatever you might be doing. Your boss's name or other people's names are not important in your resume. Now you see, or in your CV. CV, we do it because it's sort of protocol, it's academic protocol, it's a politeness factor of saying, this is who my predecessors were, my academic father and mother and grandparents and so on. So it's only a matter of that, but it's not necessarily required for jobs that require CVs. And it's just one of those things. It's just a protocol piece. Uh, the only time you want to use names other than your own in your CV or resume is if that person is a hook, an advertising, since this is an advertising piece, if that person is in an advertising hook. So if people know that Watson and Crick were so important with DNA, they'll say, oh my gosh, if she was in that lab, she must be wonderful. So if you were, if you're a biophysicist or whatever you might be doing, and you were in, you know, Einstein's lab, of course, then you'd be even older than I am. Uh, that name would have some panache. So you use names only if they are part of your advertising. Do not use them otherwise, because as people who may be working on PhDs or any degree that you're working on, uh, you're accustomed to being infantilized. You're accustomed to being an indentured servant, uh, and and you are accustomed to saying, "We did this in my dissertation," which I always think is funny because I had to do my dissertation all by myself. I didn't have a we, uh, but I know that's what we say in academia. We did this, right? And that's not what you want to do when you're going off to your next job, even if it's an academic job, because the connotation or denotation of that is that you can't do anything unless you say "Mother, may I" to your advisor or your PI if it's in sciences areas. Uh, so 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 you don't want to do anything in your resume or CV that makes you not sound as though you're an independent professional. You are an independent now, okay, and able to operate without asking for permission. You also, however, don't want to be too much I in it, because anywhere you go, particularly if it's going to be industry, team is the big reason that people would not hire PhDs. They were concerned that PhDs did so much in isolation that they really couldn't be team players. That's really changed. I've been doing what I've been doing for over 20 years now, and it's been the last 10 years that I don't see that much resistance now from corporations and other places to hiring PhDs. The notion is no longer that. Uh, so that's something that has to do with the way you approach this advertising piece. So the professional profile in either is an attempt for you to stipulate those takeaways that you want somebody to have about you. I won the Nobel Prize. I have 5 first authors in science and 6 in nature, et cetera, et cetera, all of that sort of thing that you think is going to be important. Or I have, 12 patents. I, started a business. Any of the things that for the specific audience that you're sending this to, that place that they're going to find most palatable, most interesting, because they may only remember your professional profile. And if they've read enough in the professional profile to know that they want to take this to the next step, which is interview, then your resume is finished. Your CV is finished. It's done its job. It doesn't need to do any more than that, because that's all it's for. It's not supposed to tell your whole story. The other piece is, in both cases, what you're talking about is accomplishments, things that you've done. First to come up with a novel method for doing this, or first to do that, or whatever, created a new protocol for something, created a new exercise physiology kind of a contract for a business, whatever it might be. Those are the things that if those are the things that are going to make the people that you're sending this to excited, that's what you want to have in your resume. Not that I ended up, doing a literature review of 75 books and journal articles, and then I did this and I used this kind of method to hash the data, et cetera, et cetera. That's not, unless those kinds of protocols that you used in themselves are novel and unique, and something that people might be interested in. Like when CRISPR was new, I had a big run on people. Any students who came to see me, if I asked them, can you do CRISPR? And that then signaled how we were going to do their CV or resume. So essentially, I'm sure you've heard of the elevator pitch. This is an elevator pitch, your first piece there. If you are on an elevator, you have 30 seconds, and you notice that the person across from you is the vice president of Genentech or some company that you might have an interest in. If you see that, sorry about that, my background noise, background phone calls, the spam starts now. If you see that person, is a big timer, you say, "Oh, I've always been interested in your company," in the elevator. Say, "Oh, really? Well, tell me about yourself." You know what that company does. You know what that person must do if he's a CEO, and so you have to be able to, on your feet, do this. I am a PhD biochemist with over 10 years of experience, and of course, in your resume or CV, you leave out the pronouns, but not when you're doing this orally. Okay. So that top piece is very important. Then if you have a smaller resume or there's time, then you may even want to augment the benefit of that top piece with a piece that's called highlights. And you see the highlights then are where you can, because they have bullets attached to them, it draws advertising is all about perception. So it draws the eyes to those particular things. So you can see the first highlight is first to implement a novel, something or other, developed and executed protocols, and then about the microbiome, which is hot. National Science Foundation Best Young Scientist Award. So NSF is the big word there, and then first author publications, 5 in Science and 4 in Nature. Now, I'm a sociologist, anthropologist, so I could get first authors in science and in nature because they do social science kinds of things in there. And yet when I left academe for the first time, and perhaps the last time, when I left, I worked at Mallinckrodt Corporation. So I was probably the only PhD there that wasn't a chemist. But my job didn't require that. I was in a director position. And it was the PhD that got me into that, because we have a certain panache about hiring PhDs as long as they feel you're not a solo player. And so saying that I had 4 Nature publications, they would immediately have assumed that I had done some chemical kinds of publications, the chemistry publications, but in fact, they could have been sociology. So what you pick are words, and you never lie, but you pick things that you feel will make somebody think in a certain direction. So in your whole resume, so when people bring me a resume or CV, this is the first thing that I look at. And even when we work together on it, and then finish it, this is the piece that I look at again and pay attention to some of the other things, of course, but not as much, because these are the ones that I know will be read. Whereas the rest, if they know they want to take it to the next step, they're not going to bother to read the rest of the resume. Why? They don't need to. So, if you have a Nobel Prize, but you're doing everything in chronological order and you put that on your 5th page, that's a big mistake. So you really have to have the important things highlighted, so essences of them, previews of coming attractions in that top half or maybe even top third of your resume or CV. And you notice, other than Watson and Crick in this particular one, because those were big names, there are no allusions to faculty or whose lab I was in. So then after that, in both cases, the next thing you go to often will be education, because that may be the biggest thing you've done most recently, gotten your graduate degrees or whatever you may be doing. And so that would be the next thing, because that's the selling thing. But if you already have experience, and the experience is relevant to where you're going, then I would start with the research experience or professional experience, whatever you call it. If it's research, in this case, this is for a biochemist, but so it would be called research experience. And many people will try to mix the education, the dates and the data, the degree and the research, and mix them together. The better thing is just to say PhD or master's or bachelor's, whatever it might be, with the most recent degree first. And then, and you notice, rather than talking about the Ohio State University, first, or Washington University, where I am first. It's about me. It's not about the university. So it's the PhD. And if you don't have one yet, or if you're in the midst, since this is, as I understand it, an organization of students, could be students. If it's an organization of students, you don't say PhD or master's candidate. That's a scary word. Or expected. Don't use those words. If your PhD is not going to be done until, let's say, June, then what you do is PhD biochemistry 6 2024. It's my bad if I don't notice that you haven't completed it, but if you put, so I got my PhD, earned my PhD in 1980. There were 2 of us that finished, but we were a cohort of about 6, and the other 4 are still expecting. Now, can you believe they've been expecting all these years that they'll ever finish? I mean, they'd have to start over from scratch anyway. They couldn't do the literature has changed so much since then. So that's the problem. Most people who would be hiring you probably have a degree as high as yours, and they're going to know if you say expected, uh, who knows if they'll ever finish. And if we hire them now, maybe they'll never finish. So you don't want to lie. So you're saying it's coming up, but you're not saying expected or intended or promised or whatever. You just don't bring that up. This is advertising. So if you read about Coca-Cola, they don't talk about the caffeine keeping you up, or the sugar, not good for diabetes or whatever it might be. All right. So that's the way you put together the education piece. And then the next piece then is, in this case, if it's research, the top piece is what that person did. So it could be, oftentimes it'll end up being the title of a dissertation, which is always as long as, nobody can remember the title of their dissertations generally because the names are so long. The titles are so long. But then what you say, the bullet points that are the highlights within this are the accomplishments that you did, discovered, designed, new protocol. Uh, you first to use this kind of methodology for doing this. That's what's important. Not that, you were in charge of a mouse colony. I had somebody, it's been a couple of years back now, when I said, do you have any management experience? And she said, yeah, I'm in charge of a mouse colony. I said, I don't think this company really needs somebody to be in the management positions who can manage mice. Um, Other kinds of mammals, maybe, but not mice. So, and so then your postdoctoral research associate, you can see you in reverse chronology, you put the things that you've done. Now, let's say that your big time thing that's most related to the job that you're going for was when you were the graduate research assistant. And so you don't have to necessarily follow in reverse chronology. You could figure out, you can sometimes reverse that, because again, you want to make sure that all of your resume or CV, so both, are set in an order that the first things they'll read will be those highlights, the takeaways that you want them to have, and then if they finish that and still have a tolerance or an appetite for more, you want them to read the next thing. What's the next thing they need to read? Well, perhaps it's your research that you did, or perhaps it's, the management that you did, or perhaps it's the fact that you're at Harvard Children's and Women's and Children's Hospital. I forgot what it's called. There's some postdocs who've gone there. But whatever is going to be the big hook to them. The other thing, by the way, speaking of hooks, going back to the top. So I was an Olympic athlete, okay? And many of you are probably athletes of some note, particularly if you're in physical therapy. When I talk with people over the years who've been in physical therapy, it's usually because they were an elite athlete who hurt themselves and discovered physical therapy. So, we are not unbiased with the things we choose to study. And so many of you are probably, significant athletes. So you would make sure, if you knew I was the hiring manager, that I was the vice president for research and development, whatever my position might have been, you would make sure that you also put in that top piece, that's good. I have a pointer. You have somewhere in here uh, um, athlete in the Olympic athlete, and if you knew, you know, if you knew they were tennis players or springboard divers or whatever they were, you know, Olympic swimmer, whatever it might be, you put that up there because just that alone, without reading even the rest of this, is enough for them to say, oh, I need to talk to this person because I have an affinity for this person, the things that that person does. So all of the years that I've been hiring people, which I don't do now, I would always talk to somebody who'd been in the Olympics or who was a major player, tennis pro or tennis amateur, whatever, somebody who was a serious athlete, because I just felt that we had similar backgrounds from that perspective, particularly if people thought athletes were dumb, I'd like to say, yeah, we have PhDs or other degrees. Okay, so things can be dropped, little drops of things. Like if you know that you're going to a company that has uh, perhaps their headquarters and a lot of their research facilities or whatever they're doing, whatever their product or whatever they do, the service that they do, is based in Europe, and perhaps it's in France, and you're fluent in French, then you also will have a piece here that says fluent in English and French. Or if you have more languages than that, that's good too, because a lot of times just that alone has been enough to get people hired. So you do your due diligence whenever you're going to apply somewhere or approach someplace. And usually PhDs, if that's what you are, or postdocs, will not get hired um, without doing networking to begin with, even for faculty positions. If you're faced with 300 applicants and you have to do a first pass through all of those apps, the first thing you look for is people that you know or know of. So networking is going to be very important, but that's yet another professional development topic. But coming up with things that make you similar to them you have a better shot at being able to network with them. Then we move on to the blah, blah, blah of all the things you've done, uh, and with particular emphasis on anything that you think is directly relevant. And then if you did other kinds of things that may have been summer experiences or, like Olympics or other kinds of things that you've done, or like being like Anna and Molly, if you're actively a leader in various kinds of things, various organizations, those other experiences can be in here, even though there may be a section where you have the organizations you belong to, because that's leadership. So think about what they're looking for. Most places are looking for leadership. So here you have the other kinds of things. See here, my honors and awards that I put in there for people who are reading this like it's Saturday Night Live script. Nobel laureate nomination, right? Best scientist for NMR award. Yeah. And then, and then service. So being a chair of the graduate student senate, whatever, but you don't want to go back very far with that. You don't want to go back into what you did when you were in undergrad, because if you don't have anything as a graduate student, then it looks like you fizzled out. You were really a rock star before, but now your energy is gone. You're enervated, you wore yourself out, and there's nothing left. So why would I want to hire you? You're exhausted. And memberships, of course, if you know what the person that you're targeting is a member of, and you are, definitely that's going to be important. And in fact, your membership might also move to one of those pieces where we put in, fluent in French. It may also move to the top, president of the student association of this organization. Now here's where you're going to find some interesting authors like Pterodactyl and Darn but publications. If you have a PhD and you're working on a postdoc, you may have 5 or 6 pages of publications. So here's where we change a little bit. You may put most of them in a CV, and then you split them up, with juried or peer reviewed, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody's going to read them all. So what you best do is start the whole category as selected publications and presentations. And then you can pick maybe 10 things, because a lot of publications and particularly presentations are redundant. So you can pick some that out of your list of 500, you can pick selected ones that you think are going to really most appeal to the reader. And of course, if they're the science and nature or whatever the most highest impact journal is in your area of study, you pick those and put those in as part of the selected publications. And you don't split it out, as first authors and whatever. But if you have first authors, it would be good if they were also among the first listed. And then you don't need the in preparation unless that again is one that's so very important to what you're looking at. Abstracts, you don't really need that either. So this would be more, you might have more of that. But what you would do when you have the title that says, where were we? Publications and presentations, you would have an asterisk at the end of that. And then the asterisk would take me down to the bottom, and I would see that you have unlisted numerous graduate, postgraduate, etc. So other things. And then, of course, many of you will have, you'll be part of ResearchGate or another kind of, Google, whatever, another kind of group that, or instrument that saves your publication. So I can look up the whole of your resume, your whole of your CV on that. And so you would then put those links here. So if I want to find out more than the ones that I'm most interested in, and you try to pick the ones that you think I'm going to be most interested in as the ones that you stipulate, if I want to find out the rest of them, then I still have access. Okay. So you don't need to be sending 5 pages out to anyone. So what do we have here? Somewhere between 3, maybe there's the second, and there's the third, and we ended up with, so we have 4 pages. And actually, I will tell you also that this isn't, this needs to be redone, because you should have at the top, I keep pointing with my finger, you can't see, you should have at the top Taich, P2. You don't paginate the first page, but you have your name on each of the pages past that, just so in case they print them out, as many will do, and then drop them, you don't end up, being hired as a veterinarian or interviewed as a veterinarian, even though that's not what you are, because that's what the person second page said that they were. Okay. So to reiterate, the top piece, this is the thing that you must focus on most, even though you're going to be worried about everything else. Some places like NSF, NIH, some organizations want you to do a specific format. So if you're doing it in application, then you would want to follow whatever format they ask for. But most of the time, the format isn't stipulated. And so you want to have the ability to do those top pieces, at least the first one, if not also the highlights as well, because that's where you're really telling the whole story that you want them to know about. The rest is just detail, like in an abstract for any articles that you've written. It just tells you this is preview of coming attractions. And if you want to see the rest, basically you need to, it gives you, then you go look for it in the body of the piece. This then would be something that would be handy for you in terms of not just applying for things, even if they don't ask for a resume, being able to attach one is always a good thing. But applying is, a long shot for getting jobs. Networking is the best way. And being a part of a professional organization, as you are for this one and perhaps others, this is going to be, a start for your networking. And then once you know who you want to network with, doing a resume for that person to see, because networking is just making them aware of your existence and what you do, and not asking for a job. But once you have that, you can send them in a thank you note. Oh, here's a copy of my resume, just if you'd like to know more things about me. Thanks for the time you spent with me. and then they have a resume to pass around. And over the years, I can't tell you the several thousand people I've worked with at Washington U. There have been so many times that people come running to me, Arlene, guess what? I'm going to have an interview with Biogen. And I said, well, did you send anything to them? No, I don't know why they want to interview me. How would they know about me? And if it wasn't through LinkedIn, and it was because people who, in any job that I've had, my network was people who were doing the same thing. So when I was a provost of a university, even though it wasn't large, I was pals, as a network partners. At least I was in organizations and meetings all the time with the presidents, chancellors of universities, and other provosts. So that was my network then. When I was a regional vice president for United Healthcare, so one of two regions that I was the president for, or vice president for rather, um, and it's the largest healthcare organization in the U.S. That gave me a very nice group of network partners. And if you want access to any of those, although there are not that many of them that I put in my LinkedIn, LinkedIn is mostly the people with whom I've worked at Washington U, and they know how important networking is, and so they're generally generous about networking with others. Okay, so now back to, so networking is, some people think that's my middle name, which is a lot better than being Mean Dean Arlene, I think. I'd rather be Arlene the networker or something, the queen of networking. So please ask me questions now about any piece of what I've said. Were you concerned that you have to have more than one resume and more than one CV? The big changes are really in the top piece. So it's not so much that you change the rest of it, although you might change the ordering of it. Until
Julia,
you
you can, oh, sorry, Arlene. So
so,
Julia raised her hand. You don't have to raise your hand. You can just unmute. Go ahead, Julia.
yeah.
Um, I guess so. I am academia bound, so I'm a PhD candidate. And I'm planning to stay in academia. So I'm really excited to incorporate these introductory sections and highlights into my existing CV. But I'm confused because I remember all through undergrad, I was always told like my resume is 1 page and my CV is as many pages as it needs to be. And I just want to know why this is like a 4 or 5 page resume, and if the rules change once you get your PhD or what that looks like.
No, so the deal is this. The reason, I mean, MBAs who may be well older than you are only supposed to do 1 page resumes. And the reason is nobody wants to read a bunch of BS. And the longer your resume goes, if the norm is to make them long, the longer they go, the more likely you're going to fill it, put in fillers, you'll put in everything. So the idea is with saying the 1 page is to try to make you succinct. I've seen a lot of undergrad resumes for people who are not even 22 yet. They can be 4 pages because they talk about everything they did in Boy Scouts and everything else. And some of those things are important, but not everything. And it's great that people think that those things are important, but you have to figure out what is the reader going to be interested in. So a CV is generally going to be longer because you're going to have a bibliography. You're going to have the things you've written. Even if we shorten it, maybe only do 10 pieces within there, there's going to be more. And if it's research that you've been doing, you're going to have more things that you've done. First to use this kind of implement, or first to use to do this, invented this protocol, whatever. So don't worry about that, because if people don't want to read much, that's the whole reason we're doing the 30-second top piece. So instead of letting you do a whole resume that can be read in 30 seconds, we don't care about the whole resume. What we care about really is the top piece. And there are plenty of people who say they've read journal articles, then they've only read the abstracts, and they contend that they've read them, the whole thing. They haven't. So that's the answer to, so the resume and CV should not be terribly long. Now, once you finish a postdoc, you may have 30 or 40 publications and lots of talks, but then you don't need to add in gave a talk at the departmental meeting, did something at the big organization meeting of all the PhDs on campus, whatever. You don't need to put everything in. These should not, it's not a description of your life. It's, although curriculum vitae, resume actually is more, history of life, but it's not a description of that. This is an advertising piece. So you stick to the facts that are going to be important. So the answer, in shorthand to what you said is it doesn't make any difference how many pages unless you're asked to shorten it. So there are some things you would apply for, like perhaps the Presidential Management Fellowship, other things like that, where they say we only want so many characters, or we only want so many words, and then you comply with that, obviously. But otherwise, as long as the takeaways, as long as you don't care if they read the rest, because all the juicy parts are at the top, then it can be as long as you want, because nobody's going to read the rest of it anyway. So you don't want to waste your time on it. Does that help you,
Yeah,
Julie?
thank you. That makes sense.
Yeah. Other questions? Or was I so perfect in my description? I gave you everything you needed to know. I would imagine that most of you have career centers in your schools that you are going to. Some of them, if you're in PhD and doctoral, PhD and postdoc programs, might not have much in that regard. But generally, people can be helpful. It's just that. So I am competitive, as you know, so that's why I mentioned the Olympics, because I was I made a lot of money in the dark side, because you can. So when you're good and you compete in the dark side, you get kudos and you get money. You get bonuses and you get big raises and whatever. So I made enough money to be able to take an 80% cut in salary to come back to academia. But I'm still competitive. And so I end up doing in-service trainings, or haven't done it since before the pandemic now, but I was always asked to go to Harvard and MIT and do in-service trainings for my colleagues in their career centers who are working with graduate and with postdocs and PhDs. And it's because I beat their pants off every year, even though I'm now part-time. I still do it because I get people jobs faster, and I get them. I coach. I'm a coach, so I coach them to those things, and I'm a strategist, and so I get them to those positions, and I get them. I'm very good, so people from all over the campus and even faculty people come and see me about negotiations. So that's something I'm good at. But part of it, a lot of that has to do with the fact that I was an executive in academics for 17 years. And then I was an executive in industry for 10 years. So I've seen hiring from all directions. I know what needs to be done. I know what's paid. I know all the things. And I know that networking, so I'll tell you just because you're with me, so I'm telling you the secret thing, and then I'll give you the secret decoder ring or whatever. I'm swearing you to secrecy. Don't tell Harvard and MIT. How many of you are from Harvard and MIT? You can tell them whatever you want. I usually, like the famous chefs, I leave out one piece of my recipe when I'm doing the in-service for them. We network from the top, not from the bottom. So networking, typically you'll say, well, I know somebody who works at this university and they just got the job there last year. Well, you know what? That person doesn't have much impact on whether or not you get hired. But if you can know the dean, or you can know the provost, or the chancellor, if you can somehow network with them, then you will probably get an interview. And each piece of the getting a job is its own entity. So the resume is only to open the door in the first place. So you don't have to tell everything, because you only need to tell what gets you in the door. Okay. And then the next piece is getting through the screening interview, which is really to screen you out, usually by the HR people, or and so so you have to know what to and what not to say there. And then the next one after that is usually going to be with the hiring manager, which means the boss, the person for whom you'd work. That's usually easier because it's more relevant to the things that you want to do, that you know how to do, and so it's more of a business conversation, as they all should be. But each one of those is a stepping stone to the next. So there's a different strategy for each audience. And you always, before sending things out, need to find out as much about the place and the people and whatever that you can. So you have an idea of what their interests are going to be. And before you have interviews, you ask who will be interviewing me. So you can look them up and find out, oh, this person's a chemist. So they're probably going to ask me chemical stuff, even though, I'm a biophysicist, a biophysical person. So, so that's why, so you don't look at the CV or resume to get you a job, you look at it to get you in the door. And each step then requires study and research. You can't go into it blind. You need to anticipate what you'll be asked in order to know how to answer questions. Other questions? God, I'm so good.
Do you have any specific recommendations if you're looking for a job in industry that's a little bit different from what you've been doing in your PhD, mostly in terms of the application? So you have the skills, but is there a different way to format, to highlight the skills rather than exactly the experience you have?
Yes, I mean, you don't have to go in depth about the experience. You only put within that experience section those things that are going to be relevant. So you don't have to go in great depth about each of the things that you've done. But keep this in mind. I always have people, and you may, have been one of them, probably at least one or two of you. I don't know how many people are out there. I don't know how many, but at least one or two of you have probably said, I don't want to be at the bench ever again, or I don't want to be in the lab ever again. And I'd say to them, well, what do you want to do? And they say, well, I want to do marketing. Well, why would I hire you in marketing? Well, I'm a fast learner. Well, yes, indeed. I'm sure you are, but why would I not go for somebody who already learned it? So you have to make sure that what you're looking at, Kylie, is something that you do have relevant empirical proof that you have done or can do. And sometimes that's like in computational kinds of work. So if in programming kinds of things, whether you can do, if you're doing machine learning or those sorts of things, and people get concerned because they don't have certification in those areas. But, if you needed to pick up some things like in those areas, all you have to do is show somehow in your resume that you have accomplished projects using those kinds of things. So, you want to give us a better example of what it is you want to do?
Sure. So I have kind of just general biomechanics experience, and particularly my lab works with spinal cord injury patients, and so that's where a lot of the skills have been applied. But I'd like to go into sports, and so there's sometimes they'll ask for specific sports equipment or application in a sports setting when they're posting for job positions. So yeah, I was just looking for any tips about kind of spinning that when I don't have that sports specific experience.
Well, the question is, in all of this, what you try to do is put yourself in the position of the hiring manager. So would I hire Kylie if she doesn't know what's the top and the bottom of the baseball bat? And what I'm doing is sports that have to do with baseball. So you have to take a look at how far off you are from the things you want to do. And they're always, your career path can always, if you can position, let's say, so what kind of a company would you be looking at?
I'm open to any, whether it's like with an athletic team or more like just a standalone service where high school or college athletes go to be screened for movement analysis.
But can you do movement analysis?
Yeah, I have the kinematics,
Yeah.
skills, all that. Yeah, just not in that specific sports application.
Oh, that's not necessarily a problem. I mean, it depends on, so I'm sure there are lots of variables, but it depends on if kinematics is something that you can use, there's no reason why that's the kind of thing that you emphasize. You just don't, and you never say, you know, I only know a little bit of this, like, you know, people do with languages. They'll say relatively fluent, you know, middle level fluency. What do they do that? You know, you just talk about, you don't shout out about the things that take my focus off of the things that you can do that are related to what needs to be done for those evaluations. So it's not, you know, it's a matter of learning how to, when you stipulate the things you've done, just picking and choosing. So I always tell people, make a really big resume or CV, you know, could have 25 pages, and then you can pick and choose from that. Oh, this will be good for this person, and this will be good for this person, or this position. So do that. So I don't think, it sounds to me like you're not going from, you know, being a biophysicist to being somebody who wants to do marketing. It doesn't sound like it's that far off. So you just downplay because you're not telling, this is not the whole, it's not meant to be the whole story of everything you do. So you don't have to even give all the bullet points for each of the experiences you had. Just stick to the ones that you know are most relevant.
Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else? So it takes practice. So when I work with PhD and postdoc students, first of all, I don't know how to do metabolomics or why that's important, or, you know, I don't know everything that you do and what's important about it. So I usually, for the first, at least one of these, will do a prototype, but with a definite person or a place in mind. We'll do a prototype resume so I can ask questions. And then I do that with people so that they can learn how I'm picking things, why I think this is something you ought to include and this is something that, who cares? You know, you just, you have, by the time you're doing a PhD, and you have so much experience already, and you have to remember you're multifaceted. So you may be a biomedical engineer, so you have the engineering, you have the medical piece of it, you have the bio piece of it, and the way you express it in the labs that you've chosen and the projects that you do will have certain focuses that could dictate the direction you go. But you may also have had, you may also have been part of a team that was working on some other type of projects. So when you do that top piece, you can say PhD with a focus, with a focus in, and it doesn't have to be like a PhD in biomedical engineering or PhD in biomechanics, whatever it might be. You say PhD with a focus in, and it's not, you know, our degrees, we all have the same degrees when we get PhDs. We're all PhDs. So my grandmother used to introduce me. This is my granddaughter, Dr. Taich, but not the real kind. And then when I said, she says, no, tell me, what is a PhD? I said, what's a doctor of philosophy? She said, well, who needs their philosophies taken care of? I said, probably a lot of people. So remember, it's not the PhD or the department that you're from or the area of or the area that the department is maybe engineering or whatever. It's the focus that you had. And since you are multifaceted and have done probably more than one project, or have been a part of more than one project, you can say with a focus in. And that's where you put, so your focus might be, Kylie, your focus might be in, you know, evaluation of whatever it might be. And that's your top statement. So that's how you're introducing yourself. So you've already turned my mind to thinking about you as an assessor, an evaluator, and who does physical or walking kinds of assessments. Any other questions?
We are at the top of the hour. If anyone has any other questions, do you have, actually, I can unpause it to see if anyone wants to ask any questions off recording.